6 o'clock. Turn your mics on if you'd be so kind. I'm going to call the meeting of the Planning Commission for March 20th, 2024 to order. Roll call.
Duval. Gorham.
Here.
Grunenwald. Norwood. Stangline.
Here.
Peterson.
Here.
Francis.
Here.
All right. We have a volunteer to lead the pledge. All right. I will. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag. All right. Well done. Looking for a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
So moved.
All right. Do we hear a second?
I'll second it.
We have a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Hearing none, we roll on to the minutes. Looking for approval of the minutes from February 21st.
So moved.
Second.
We have a second. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion. All right. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right, we have done that. We're moving along to new business. Number 6, and this is going to be, the A and B are both going to be with My Neighbor to Love Coalition and the development. Are we calling the whole thing the Creekside Development? Is that about a good enough term to call the whole thing?
Yep, that's the development in the
That's the
plat.
whole development. And so step 1 is going to be a conditional use permit. Basically, it's an amendment, if I understand that right, to the conditional use permit for their 12 plex. And with that, I'm going to have James introduce us.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this one is actually a new CUP. The last one that we did for the 12-plex was an original one. That was the amendment.
Thank you.
So the applicant hadn't applied for this one yet.
Alrighty.
So Vicki Kinney has submitted a request for a CUP for parcel 41040889 in the traditional neighborhood 2 district. The purpose of this request is to construct a 12-unit multifamily apartment building consisting of 2 700-square-foot 2-bedroom units and 10 400-square-foot studio apartment units. The exact same building as depicted in the last Planning Commission meeting. Layout is the same. What's slightly different is the landscape plan because it is on a different parcel. So staff wasn't made aware of the wrong PID number under the aerial map. So I just did want to point that out, which will be corrected for the City Council packet. The proposed structure does meet the 20-foot front yard setback requirement and the minimum density requirement of 9 dwelling units per acre for that parcel. The proposed site plan includes 16 parking spaces with 2 handicap spaces, which meet the off-street parking requirements of the zoning ordinance, which is 1 space per studio unit and 2 spaces per 2-bedroom unit. The applicant has proposed plantings along the south property line. The adjacent property is currently vacant. However, staff recommends still requiring that screening along that area in the event that the property is developed in the future. The parking lot is also screened from Northwest 3rd Street. The lot is required to have a total of 14 trees. The applicant is proposing 19 trees with a mixture of coniferous and deciduous trees. The trees depicted on the plan must meet the minimum size requirements that's in the landscaping section of the zoning code. The landscape plan also meets the 50 shrub requirement for each unit. There's a 4 shrub requirement per unit. The project is also supported by the comprehensive plan, which states drive infill development and redevelopment toward areas where current infrastructure is present or places where high levels of blight or disinvestment exist. This is a candidate as there's current utilities there, there's current roadways in that area, and there was a new hydrant installed as well. So with that, staff recommends approval of the conditional use permit for the construction of a 12-unit multifamily apartment at PID 41040889 with the condition that any additional lighting conforms to the outdoor lighting ordinance. And with that, I can answer any questions.
All right. Any questions for James? No questions? All right. Well, if we have no questions, then we are going to move on to open a public hearing here at 6:04. And I'll ask the applicant if she'd like to come up and speak. You've done this many times, you know what to do.
Vicki Kinney, live in Lakeshore, Minnesota. Yes, and what we're wanting to propose again is the next phase. This would be phase 3 of Creekside Community. So we're hoping to break ground for the 12-plex that we're currently working on. The lands will be leveled by then, and so we're ready to apply for another grant that we feel pretty hopeful that we'll be getting for the next two buildings. So the grant is due, the application is due in May. So we want to make sure that we have approval, so that just makes our grant application a little stronger. So this will be for the 2 units, so the 12-plex, and of course, we're applying for the center building also.
All right.
That's, yeah, so if you have any questions.
For Ms. Kinney?
I do.
Yeah.
What if you don't get the grant? Well, do you still move forward? Does that put it on hold?
If, to be really honest, if we don't get the grant for this, then it will be fundraising and seeing if we can find other means, but it's a lot of money. So there is a possibility that we wouldn't be able to move forward.
Other questions for Ms. Kinney? If not, I have how many people are currently living in Creekside? What's the current, currently, how many residents do you
Sure.
have?
Right now, 5. We did have 6, but one found another place to live.
6, right. And they're living in the 12-plex that was built to the north,
We have a
correct?
4-plex, yeah.
The 4-plex that was
4-plex.
built to the north, okay.
Yep, yep.
Very good. Have there been any problems at all? Are we hearing anything from neighbors, or has there been any concerns at all? How's it been running?
It's been going well. We have had some reports of theft. So not from our residents, but our residents getting things stolen off the property. So we've really cracked down on one unit, has a lot of too many people that kind of come by, know he's there, and so I think a little vulnerable to having things stolen. So we've been kind of watching that. Might put up a security camera. But otherwise, as far as the residents themselves, we had, had a little issue of collecting, too many bicycles. That was a problem for a while, but we've corrected that. We have a storage shed for those outside things, and working on keeping those porches cleaner.
Do you have a staff that assists you in overseeing it, or are you the overseer?
One of our residents kind of oversees, it just is a resident, but just kind of takes on just kind of making sure everything's okay, can earn service credits for that position. And then we have our supportive friends. So it's a group of volunteers that, is matched up, each person, and each resident has a supportive friend that just is kind of there to somebody to call on and look out. But I know them all very well, and so I'm quite involved in their lives.
So most days there is somebody who walks through the community and makes sure everything's on the up and up. That's pretty regular basis.
Nobody
or
outside.
not so
Nobody
much?
outside of the people that live there, because these are residents. I don't think we're not monitoring that
You're not
closely.
monitoring. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
no, but the one resident does kind of keep an eye on things, and if there's anything that's if the music is too loud in one unit, they'll call me up and I'll make that phone call. But
All right.
yeah,
Very good.
yeah.
I have one follow-up.
Oh,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson.
Is it more of a short term? What is the term rentals on these? I mean, since I'm new, I'm still.
Sure, yeah. No, it's a good question. These are month-to-month rental units, but the idea is permanent housing.
Okay.
So as long as the residents are being good neighbors, they're taking care of their property, and they can live there as long as they need to. So the idea is permanent housing. And just to say, for the 12-plex units, we will have a property manager on site for those units. So that will make it a little bit easier.
Very good.
Okay.
Are you finished?
Yes, I'm finished.
Oh, just a quick follow-up question. Will
You
the
bet.
property manager be a manager for the entire site or just the 12-plex?
It'll be for both buildings.
For both buildings?
Yeah.
Okay.
We just don't want to. We didn't want to give up one unit in a fourplex when we had 4 houses. 4
Okay.
units for people. It just just wasn't right.
But giving up one with 12, that's doable?
Yes, yeah, we wrote that in the grant. So that was the approval of the grant that we received.
Very good. All right. Yeah, please, go
Yeah.
ahead.
As a 501c3,
Yes.
are you guys paying property taxes?
No.
No? Okay.
The assessment, but which is still pretty high. But no.
Good. Any other questions for Ms. Kinney? Hearing none, I'll thank you for
All right, thanks.
your contribution. Would anybody else like to speak on the issue? Do we have anybody online that would like to speak? All right. Being that's the case, at 6:09, we will close the public hearing and open up to commission discussion or questions. Well,
I have none. Looks like the
None?
same as the last one.
okay, y'all feeling pretty good about it? All right. Well, if you guys feel like you have discussed the matter, I guess
I will move to approve.
we have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second that.
All right. Any discussion? Still no discussion? That's all right. That's good enough. Excellent. All right. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right. There we go. All right, Ms. Kinney, we're going to do it again. This time we're going to talk about a boarding house, 6B. And once again, I will turn to James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Vicki Kinney has submitted a request for a CUP amendment at PID 41040888. The purpose of this conditional use permit amendment request is to operate a boarding house along with 3 400-square-foot studio apartments. The original plan, the building looked very similar. This one's slightly smaller, but the original plan had a boarding house on the second floor with a health center on the first floor. The health center was considered a permitted use within the TN2 district. The boarding house is obviously still the conditional use permit, and with the amendment is required. So staff provided the occupancy limits for each boarding room, and the number of beds/occupancies are appropriate for each room. The proposed structure meets all setback requirements of the TN2 district. For the off-street parking requirements, there shall be at least 1 parking space per boarding room. The applicant is proposing 4 rooms, which would require then a total of 4 parking spaces for the boarding house portion of it. The applicant is also proposing the 3 studio apartments, which would, with our new off-street parking ordinance, for a studio apartment, it's 1 parking space, so that's an additional 3. Within the depicted plan, there are 8 spaces, so it does meet the off-street parking ordinance. The lot is required to have a total of 10 trees. This parcel retained existing mature trees after the grading and tree removal project was completed. This was one of the only areas that isn't going to have a kind of a major regrade on it to compete with the root systems of the trees. So according to the landscape plan, the applicant is also proposing to plant 5 additional trees in the front yard. So the existing trees and the added trees do meet the planting tree requirement for the site. Again, the project is supported by the comprehensive plan in a similar nature to drive infill development and redevelopment toward areas where current infrastructure is present or places where high levels of blight or disinvestment exists. So with that, staff recommends approval of the conditional use permit amendment for the operation of boarding house at PID 41040888 with the condition that any additional lighting conforms to the outdoor lighting ordinance. And with that, I can answer any questions.
Questions for James?
I have one, or
Please.
2 maybe.
All right, go. Take 2.
Basically, what I would assume, this is more like a dormitory that you, am I getting that correct, the boarding house?
Yep, so if somebody were to, propose a dormitory, it would
Right.
fall under the boarding house
Yep,
portion
okay.
of it. So the apartments are kind of separate, but this one has a common kitchen area. It does have common bathrooms as well, so similar to a dormitory.
And is there time frames on these? I mean, are these short-term, or are they month-to-month or yearly, or?
That's not depicted in there. It probably, it's not an apartment, so I'm not sure if it would fall under our short-term rental ordinance. I guess I'd have to look further into that.
I don't know if it matters.
Yeah, the apartments would definitely fall under, it would have to be a month-to-month lease unless there'd be an interim use permit for a short-term rental. Boarding houses really aren't stipulated in there as much.
Any further questions for James? All right, I'm going to open a public hearing at 6:13. Ms. Kinney, I'll let you, you know what to do.
And Vicki Kinney, Lakeshore, Minnesota.
Tell us about the boarding house.
Yeah, we
What's
made
gonna
it.
be, I'll just
Okay.
kind of preface it by, what's it going to feel like day to day? What's the boarding house going to kind of work like? I'm just curious.
Sure. Well, we'll have the 3 apartments there as well. One of the apartments will be, again, a property manager kind of overseeing the boarding house on the second floor. So the idea of a boarding house is that we heard there's a need for transitional housing. So there's just, obviously we know there's just not enough housing. And there's some people that just need it for a little while. So we thought this might be a good way to accomplish that, is have people that need a place to stay. I mean, they could be there for 6 months, they could be up to a year until they can find, get stabilized and find housing. It gives them a chance to kind of get a feel for what it's like to live in Creekside community. It's an intentional living community, so there's a lot of expectations as far as getting along and following all the rules in our handbook and all that. So it gives them a chance, and while they're waiting for another apartment to be built, it gives them a chance to get stable.
Very good. Questions for Ms. Kinney?
Oh, I did have one. Have you guys considered some kind of secure storage for bicycles or something like that?
We more than likely will end up doing that
Okay.
again. I mean, and it really depends. We just, I don't know that we would have this last time, but we just had a fine collector of goods. So, we more than likely will be probably putting a small garage or something like that on the property.
Yeah.
Other questions for Ms. Kenny?
Maybe one.
Sure.
Are most of the clients I mean, I assume they're getting some sort of assistance to help with the rent and things like that. Is that the way this works?
Well, not necessarily.
Okay.
Everybody has to pay rent, but we keep our rent very low. So in our current fourplex, it's $450 a month, and then each resident has an opportunity to earn service credits, which could reduce it up to $100. So we have 2 people that are full-time employed. We have 1 college student, and then other tenants are on like SSI disability.
It's just because you're building these things so cheap that you can rent them that inexpensive, or
No,
is
it's
there
just-
other grants along with it? Or?
It's because this is really all people can afford. So there's people that are living on so little. There's no way they can afford to live. So we're just trying to solve homelessness.
Yeah.
So the one requirement for our residents is they have to have a history of homelessness. And so they have to have that verified. So our mission is to get people out of homelessness, out of the encampments, off the streets, and into stable, permanent housing. So, yeah, it's really because, if you make $900 a month, and you still have maybe potentially a car and a cell phone, groceries, utility bills, which are not cheap. It's really all people could afford.
I have a question.
Yes.
What are the rules concerning alcohol and drug use in the boarding house or in the let's stick to the boarding house. What are
Sure.
the rules?
In the boarding house, alcohol isn't allowed. Obviously, no drunken parties. People are allowed to have a drink in there, but no drug use. So we have to follow, and they have to assign a commitment that if they want to stay there, they have to follow the rules, and it'll be law-abiding citizens. So even with our fourplex now, if somebody wants to have a beer, and that's perfectly fine. But there is no drug use. That would be a grounds for. But having said that, we're not expecting people in the boarding house to be sober. And I mean, we're not saying no to addicts. If somebody is an addict, they can live there. Our goal is to get people stabilized. They just cannot use on the property. That makes it clear.
Okay. So it's fair to say it's not a sober house. We've had
It's not a
discussions
sober
of
house.
houses and
No.
things like this.
No.
All right.
No.
Good. No, I think the role you have is a valuable role and a valuable thing to do. So, very good. Hearing no other questions, Ms. Kennedy, thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
And once again, anybody else here would like to speak on the subject tonight? Do we have anybody online, Brent? We have nobody online? All right, we'll wrap the public hearing at 6:17 and open it up to discussion.
Okay, so I do live within walking distance. From what I've read, this type of housing, the outcomes are good, so I'm not overly concerned about that. And I do think it's meeting a need. One need that the city has, though, is roads being paid for and schools being paid for. So I do wish this valuable piece of land was contributing property taxes towards that. But no, I mean I'll vote to approve just based on kind of the parameters of things we're allowed to look at. So
Very good. Other discussion or questions? If not, if somebody's feeling daring,
I will move to approve the conditional use permit amendment.
very good.
I would second again.
All right, and we have a second. Any discussion? Are we discussed out?
yeah.
All right, very good. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Very good. You have yourself a CUP. James, what are the next the steps for Ms. Kinney on these 2 CUPs?
Yeah, so the next step, both of the applications will be heard at the next city council meeting, which will be April 1st at 7:30. This planning commission is an advisory board. Council has the final decision.
All right, thank you so much. With that, we move on to 6C. This is an IUP. Once again, we have another short-term rental popping up. This time would be 714 South 7th Street. James, set us up, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Mark Riesdorf, on behalf of Mighty Homes LLC, has applied for a short-term rental at 714 7th Street South. Staff did reach out to the property owner in May of 2023 after Brainerd Public Utilities indicated this property was listed as a rental. Staff then, after that, discovered this property was being advertised as a short-term rental on the Airbnb website. This was after receival of the rental license. So just did want to give some history and context to the property. The applicant has blocked out the rental dates through the application process for the short-term rental. So with that, some of the property characteristics: the driveway adjacent to the alley is available for parking and provides 2 large spaces. The pet garbage and noise policy are consistent with the city code. The applicant requests occupancy of no more than 5 guests based on the bedroom size that was provided by the applicant. The house would allow for 6 occupants. One of the bedrooms does not meet the minimum width standards of 7 feet. The applicant had listed as 6. It's something that the building official could check on prior to occupancy. The house has been inspected by the housing inspector and is approved for occupancy. The applicant did rectify all the changes that were asked by the building inspector. As of writing this, one person has contacted the department and did not have any issues with allowing this use. So with that, staff recommends approval of the interim use permit for one short-term rental unit at 714 7th Street South, Brainerd, with the following conditions: submittal of the local option sales tax form to the finance department, a local management agent must be provided to staff, and the interim use permit shall terminate 1 year after issuance. And with that, I can answer any questions. And the applicant is also present.
James, I have a question. I'm trying to figure out, kind of follow the timeline that you laid out there. Was the applicant advertising this for rent knowing they didn't have a permit? Is that a fair statement or not a fair statement?
I'm not sure if we found that. It was Brainerd Public Utilities. The applicant may be able to speak on this. Brainerd Public Utilities was listed as a rent, so it could have been being fixed up or not rented at the time.
Okay.
Not sure on that. But Brainerd Public Utilities was the one that made us aware.
Okay. Did they make the applicant aware, or they just made you aware?
Made us aware.
Made you aware. Very good. Other questions for James?
Why do you feel that you need to have local management on the property?
That's a requirement of the rental license, and the rental license is a requirement of the interim use permit. The applicant has provided, I believe, an update to that is something that staff just needs to verify that the residence is homesteaded and is permanent residence.
All right. Other questions for James? Looking back, looking forth. All right. We'll do a public hearing at 6:22 for the short-term rental at 714 South 7th. I'm going to open that at 6:22. If the applicant is here, I would love to have you come up and speak. And just name and address would be great.
Mark Riesdorf, and I'm 228 Broadway Avenue, St. Paul Park, Minnesota.
Very good. Tell us a little bit about this property and kind of what led to it, and curiosity.
We own a large cleaning company in the cities. We do a lot of one-time or Airbnb cleanings. So with how difficult employees are, we started buying Airbnbs ourselves. We have one in Longville, one in Garson. This one, we're looking at a couple more right now.
I have a quick question. Are you buying them, or are you buying houses and converting them to the short-term rental?
We buy them and convert them.
So you're buying houses on the market
Yeah.
and converting them to short-term rental. Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions for the applicant?
Yeah, what's your target market? Who are you, who's renting a house in the middle of Brainerd that's not on a mountaintop or on a lake?
It's Airbnb. It's a huge. It's really kind of changed, I think, the travel world. When I take my team to Vegas, for example, we waited 3 hours in line to check in. It's crazy. You rent an Airbnb, you walk right up, you check in, nobody bothers you, and you move on and enjoy your trip. You know, our house in Garson, they just came right up, moved in. You know, they don't have any drama. They don't have to wait for anything. Everything's there. They can do what they want.
So is it typical very short, like a weekend or a week, or is it?
So I think our minimum is 3 days. So you have to stay a minimum of 3 days.
Okay, that's just your policy. I mean,
That's
what's
our
the-
rule.
I mean, with your other experiences and places, what's the average that people are staying?
3 days.
That's the average too.
That seems to be the average, yeah.
So it's a vacation instead of a hotel. This is the option, is what you're finding.
I am, yeah.
Okay.
We travel a lot, and everywhere we go now, we go Airbnb. eliminates all the drama. And, it's a good business.
Okay.
Even that house in Brainerd, it's an older house. We cleaned it up, redid everything in there, and the value is there.
Have you set up a local agent? Is there a local agent now in place?
Yes.
All right, very good. All right. Hello there, James. Come on up. Very good. Other questions for the applicant? All right. Thank you. We may have additional questions, but for right now, thank you so much. Unless you have questions for us, we'll proceed with the hearing.
Nope, thank you.
All right, very good. Would anybody else like to speak on the interim use permit for 714 South 7th? Anybody online, Brent? Nobody online? All right, very good. I will open this up to commission discussion. Not hearing a lot. I'll go ahead. I think this kind of speaks to some of my concerns about the lack of of regulation of short-term rentals in the city. I certainly, in terms of individuals, I totally respect that it's a business model. It works for you. You see property, you move on it. I totally appreciate free enterprise, and I appreciate people saying, I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to put my money out there. I'm going to try to make a business work. I still find it distressing that we're watching the slow but sure conversion of our neighborhoods into hotels. And I think what makes a community are people who are here for the long term, and they're invested in more than the house. They're invested in the schools, they're invested in their neighborhoods, they're invested in the shared situation of the community, and that they're here for the long term. And that's my general concern. It's getting off subject, but we'll circle back to that a little later here again today. But that would be my concern. I just think this kind of is a perfect case study for how a property that used to traditionally would go to a workforce housing that's so needed in our community, helping take the pressure off this, is basically being turned into a short-term hotel. And but that's my take on it. Other discussion or questions?
Yeah, one comment with that,
Sure.
I guess, would be, I assume it was on the open market that everybody had a chance to buy.
Absolutely.
So, it is, in my mind, it's still America where you get I don't see a difference between that and buying a convenience store or whatever, or another business. That's my opinion of the situation. I think it's great that he's kind of figured it out, that it works. And I can't see that is affecting our housing to have 8 of these in town. I don't see that as happening.
8 that we know of.
Let's say it's 30 that we know of. It's, those people are coming there, to me, it'd be hurting more the motel business
Right.
than anything. And are they complaining?
Right. I appreciate your comments, and I probably started us off the subject here too. But going back to the applicant and for the use permit, any other questions or discussion on the interim use permit?
For the record, Commissioner Norwood now present at 6:28. Is there any additional condition as to listing as to being that the 1-bedroom is not a meeting requirement bedroom? So it would be listed as a 2-bedroom house rather than a 3-bedroom house.
We're going to turn to James on this one.
So we will have the building official or building inspector follow up and get a measurement for that bedroom to see if it is a legal bedroom to occupy. However, the current bedrooms that we have do support what the applicant has asked for an occupancy of 5.
Very good. Other comments or questions? Otherwise, if somebody has a motion, I'd be certainly open to that. James, do you have something else?
So move that approve the permit for IUP. I forgot the address.
714 South 7th Street.
714 South 7th Street with the listed conditions and additional one after report back from building official as to the total amount of bedrooms as to be listed as in its advertisements.
Very good. Do we have a second for the motion?
Second.
We have a second. Discussion on the motion. Hearing none? All right. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. All right, we have passed. Next steps for the applicant.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So next steps are this will be heard at the next City Council meeting on April 1st, and City Council has the final decision.
All right, very good. Thank you so much. We have moved on to 6D, letter of opposition to what's being called the Missing Middle Housing Bill, more formally known in the Senate at least as SF 1370. I think I first mentioned this last month, and it's been getting a lot of mention right now in the press, and people are discussing it. James, could you bring us up to speed on how do we get to a letter of opposition? How do we get to this point?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So there was emails that were sent out from various League of Minnesota cities, other entities as well, to make municipalities aware of what's going on with the potential missing middle bill that would limit local government zoning authority specifically on residential development. As I was typing it, there was an update. I believe the latest revised version of the bill did allow up to only 4 units in a single-family neighborhood, where the previous one was going to be allowing up to 8. There's also looking at restricting minimum lot sizes, allows an owner to subdivide a lot by right, sets allowable building heights in some instances, restricts cities from establishing design or material standards, requires cities to allow multifamily housing in commercial areas, and sets maximum parking standards. So with that, it would take a lot out of what cities, are looking at in their own best interest for their zoning code, where they really know what's going on in their local community. So with these, like the League of Minnesota Cities, they said reach out so you can send a letter to the governor, your representatives, your state representatives, just to let them know where your community's at and what your community's thoughts are on it. So with that, staff did draft a letter, is recommending the Planning Commission to review the letter, provide feedback, and direct staff to make any necessary changes before this letter would be brought to City Council for approval. And with that, I can answer any questions.
All right. Questions for James? No questions. Are we, yes?
How many changes would we be potentially looking at as to our newly approved zoning code?
I guess one benefit, so the city of Brainerd did spend quite some time with our new zoning code here. So there aren't as many changes that we would see as maybe some other municipalities that really have only R1 in a lot of their cities. That being said, we did spend a lot of time on it and really looked at what was best for our community. So there would still be some changes that we have to make that could be detrimental to all the work that we had done. But again, it may not impact our zoning code as it would impact certainly our neighboring community as Baxter.
Why so?
Baxter has a lot more is single-family zoning than Brainerd does. That's probably one of the biggest ones. Sure. So I'd say our administrative subdivisions, a process is maybe a little easier. We have more mixed-use development in our areas. We have downtown areas. We're talking about mixed-use development maybe opening up in the commercial corridor district, where that isn't maybe as present in a city like Baxter.
All right, very good. Any other questions or thoughts on this? I just have to add that I think one of the things that the people pushing the bill have discussed that I find a little disturbing is that a lot of communities are finding it. They would rather not hear heated opposition. They don't want the villagers with the torches showing up at the meetings, and they would rather turn this into an administrative thing. And I know citizen involvement is messy. It's always going to be messy, but it's inherent to the process. It's just part of the process, and it's part of what makes it legitimate. Is that we're willing to listen to people, and we're willing to listen to people get upset, and take them seriously. And I think this just kind of, to me, it's kind of anti-democratic in a certain way. It just takes out a certain kind of shared decision-making process, and it turns it into an administrative process. Not that I don't trust the administrators, but I do like that people have to publicly say, "This is my idea," and other people get to walk up and say, "I think you're full of I think you're full of it. I think it's a terrible idea. I think that's great. I think that's part of what this bill does is kind of just takes a lot of that out. And also, it doesn't seem to take a whole lot of time to consider what is there, what communities are doing. It just takes no consideration at all. I would be more impressed if it said that if communities had certain things in place, you're exempt from it. In other words, if you have certain process, if you can demonstrate that you are committed to dealing with housing in a progressive way, that you just go ahead and you do that. I think a lot of this is aimed at Minneapolis and a lot of the 2040 plan of Minneapolis. But anyhow, that's my 2 cents worth. My question, James, are you looking for a motion tonight or just a consensus? What are you looking for?
I would say a motion just to, if there are any recommended changes, certainly, make that part of the motion. If not, just recommend that staff proceeds with the letter as drafted to the next city council meeting.
All right, very good. We're looking for a motion as it was described.
So moved.
All right.
Second, or go ahead.
All right, Colin's got the second on that one. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. There we go. We are moving on to unfinished business, and we have the item that just keeps on coming back. We have the update on the short-term rental ordinance that we've. It's not quite a year, but it's a good 6-8 months now we've been working on this one. All right, James, help us out a little bit on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So staff has provided a summary of the past meetings regarding the short-term rental ordinance. Just as a refresher, at the last Planning Commission meeting, the Commission discussed some possible changes, removing the cap that limits an individual property owner to own no more than 1 VDU in the city, increase the cap from 20 VDU short-term rentals to 40 VDU short-term rentals allowed in the city. Staff also recommended that multifamily buildings be allowed to operate 2 units instead of 1, which would then get rid of the grandfathering clause within the ordinance. So with that, the Planning Commission did not make any recommendation to amend the ordinance, but rather attempted to hold a joint workshop with City Council. Upon staff recommendation, a motion to hold a joint workshop had failed at the City Council meeting, and at that meeting, staff was given no further direction regarding the proposed short-term rental ordinance. So as the motion failed at the City Council meeting, the Council must give direction to staff before revising the proposed ordinance. So staff included this memo in here as just kind of a general update to the Planning Commission, as well as an opportunity to discuss amongst yourselves where you think the ordinance could go next, as we have council member present, we have our council member liaison as well.
Very good. And you got questions for James? Then just a question about mechanics. What are our options? Can we just send? We can't just send the ordinance back.
It really should come from council at this point. What that direction is.
Okay. So we're really kind of. I don't know what options we have. I'm going to turn to Tiffany and say, help us out. What's going on?
If I knew what was going on,
Okay.
I am equally befuddled. I have no great words of wisdom to share.
Okay.
I thought a workshop would really help us kind of pin down, because it seems like different parts are upsetting to different members of the council. But if I count my votes, it depends on who's in the room.
Yeah.
And I know that there was a tie vote that the mayor broke, and he didn't want to vote. He didn't want to do it. He was not looking forward to that vote because he was going to hear about it either way. So.
All right, very good. I guess if we could have gone back, my personal feeling was that we should have offered, try to find a consensus with the ordinance that we sent forth to the city. That was kind of my feeling on it, but there wasn't a consensus on this group. But my thought was that we should have thought, okay, what is the core? What 1 or 2 elements that we could agree upon, that we can go forth with? And maybe let certain hot button issues like downtown, let those pass. Let's get something in place. Because I still personally feel that the short-term rental is something we want to get ahead of. I really do. And this is an issue that's been moving so fast. We've talked about this during the comprehensive, we went through the comprehensive plan 3 years ago, and there was no such thing as a short-term rental issue, none. And so, but we do know that there is a housing issue, and we do know that there seems to be short-term rentals that are popping up every time we look. There are more and more popping up. And so I think somehow or another, it would be nice if something needs to move forth on this. And that's my idea on it. And I think, again, if it's something that I'm open to compromise and saying, okay, we're going to get part of what we want, that I would be good with that, and maybe not take the idealistic point of all of these things are important, except all of them. I personally would be willing to make a deal on it, but I think our options are pretty limited right now.
I have a question of what your thoughts are. Are we gearing these short-term rentals more as, these are VRBOs, where they're single days and 3 days staying? Or are they traveling nurses and, what are you, I guess since this is my second meeting.
Yeah.
What are you considering a short-term rental?
Well, we have two different, we have 2 classes? James, 3 classes. Help me out with the
So
3 classes.
as of right now, a short-term rental is just anything under 28 days. So some of the models, especially on lake areas, are going to be maybe, we do have Rice Lake, we do have Gilbert, maybe geared a little bit more towards vacation. Obviously, we have a lot of activities that go on at the school, at CLC. We have the wedding, event that at the NP Center that people may stay at in town. So there's some of that stuff that goes on with it as well. Traveling nurses is also an important thing that some of these VRBO owners look at. Traveling nurses, from what I've heard, are either maybe 3-week or 6-week contracts. So the 6-week ones aren't an issue, but the 3-week contracts are. That would still be considered the short-term rental. Some of them look at doing traveling nurses and then trying to fill, maybe those spots in between with some, 3-week stays. So I've heard that as kind of a model as well. So there's a lot of different ways to do it out there. Obviously looking at this ordinance, maybe there is some type of balance to protect, protect some of the housing in here where we do have somewhat of a cap on it and some restrictions, but some short-term rentals may be good. It could, spur some economic development and keep some people in the city staying where they're not going to hotels in Baxter. But again, losing your whole supply of residential housing, is a possible issue as well. So maybe, just trying to find that balancing act. So one thing that could be done at the next city council meeting is council members can ask for something to be on the council agenda. And at that point, they could ask for a recommendation to proceed. Maybe it's bringing it back to the planning commission for the commission to bring an ordinance rather than asking for the joint workshop, because that did get voted down. So that would be a potential option.
I have an idea.
Mr. Peterson.
Why don't we look at this as 2 different projects, two different items of VRBO in a short-term rental? That one is from 1 to 7 days and one's from 7 to whatever, and you're limiting, because what I'm getting out of this, you're trying to stop the VRBOs, not the ones that are renting a month or 2 at a time. People that are coming, that's not gonna affect your housing limit. I mean, I have rentals, we go month to month after they've been there a while and stuff. So that could be people that are living here or coming to work here anyway. But maybe you should be looking at it as 2 separate entities or 2 different projects.
James?
Yeah, so the month-to-month would still be allowed. That would just be considered a regular rental. Like Ms. Kinney had talked about, they don't even make somebody sign a 12-month lease and they go month-to-month.
Yeah.
It starts out as a month-to-month, and that's not considered a short-term rental. So not an issue on that part of it. The traveling nurse, where there are a number of them that have 3-week contracts, and then maybe they are off 2 weeks and then come back 3 weeks.
Right.
Kind of an issue with that one, but as of right now, we have a few of them. I don't know if it requires 2 different ordinances, as something for planning commission to kind of consider on that part, but though that's kind of what we have right now.
I would say the VRBOs are probably more people's issue.
Other thoughts on that? Other thoughts on Mr. Peterson's suggestion?
I guess, well, my thoughts are that I think ultimately the problem is supply. If we didn't have a supply problem, I don't think we would have the same concerns. about, potentially capping it. So, maybe an angle would be to find a way to do a zoning adjustment to allow higher density, expand a higher density zone. And then we say, if the city council is willing to pass that, I'm not actually sure. They would have to approve that, correct?
Is this an issue of density or is it an issue of use, I guess? It comes the question.
Two different things, I think.
So, obviously increasing housing would help, alleviate the situation. I think we've done a lot of things within our zoning code, getting rid of a lot of our single-family housing to allow it to 4 units if it fits the lot, allowing accessory dwelling units, which other codes don't allow. So I think the city probably has tackled that issue. I think the biggest things holding back, potential development is just cost for that labor to construct it, the material costs, the interest rates that we have right now. And a lot of the projects really, and especially in greater Minnesota here, really hinge on that government funding and getting that, getting that grant that they apply for. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that's holding back some of these multifamily development projects more so than, density. I think the city of Brainerd has done a pretty good job with their zoning code on that.
Okay. So we don't think there's a lever we can pull to adjust, help the supply?
I think we've pulled the levers.
Sure.
I think.
There's areas you can, in town.
Excuse me?
There's areas in town that you could make densities greater.
Oh, was right. And when we started the comprehensive plan, the assumption was like the north side was single family, and that was all it was going to be, which of course was historically not true. What we have done though is to recognize, I think, that every neighborhood is going to have high density housing. To some extent, every neighborhood will. And they always have. The north side, we always view it as single family, but it's always had multifamily housing, so it's always been part of it. But the core issue for us, I think, in addressing our residents, which is our ultimate job, is housing and opportunities. I think that has to be the overall goal. Is how can we make this a more livable, more affordable town? And because that ties in so much with business and everything else that we're trying to promote. James.
Chair, at this juncture, I believe that staff and commission and general public has invested a significant amount of time and effort into this current ordinance. I don't believe that that we will necessarily solve the problem by making a separate ordinance as to adjust. I don't believe 2 ordinances will fix the dilemma. I believe that it will either be some amendments to this ordinance and or no ordinance, and it will just continue as IUPs. As to how to fulfill and meet expectations, I am extremely interested in Councilmember Terry's points of view, as for maybe some assistance and guidance as to what, unfortunately she was not there at the last meeting before it was returned to us, but I am interested, if Chair would allow.
I would allow Ms. Terry to address the group. That'd be an honor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commission members. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. That's the purpose of me being here tonight. So I was not able to attend that meeting. I was out of town for work. I will suggest that I place this on the agenda for the council to vote again. And potentially it may pass or it may not, but at least we'd have a full council vote.
Very good. Questions for Ms. Terry?
As proposed at the last time that appeared before council, so no amendments, or do you believe there needs to be amendments?
Ideally, there could be amendments that could potentially get other council members on board, but I would propose bringing the one that was brought before, as you've had it.
We can make amendments right now, can we? Because really, technically, this has left us and has gone to the city council. So we really can't make amendments, can we?
Yep. So as Councilmember Terry stated, a potential recommendation from a council member could be either to bring it back to the next council meeting as a first reading, second reading, or to ask the council to bring it back to Planning Commission to make amendments to then bring back to council.
Ms. Terry, do you have a preference between those 2 routes?
I would bring it back in the way that it was brought initially. I think it's time for the council to make a decision and not bring it back to you guys again.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, do we have another question?
What,
there?
not for,
Okay, thank you, Ms. Terry.
I'm wondering because the meeting before the meeting before the meeting, we did have a vote out of the council to send it back. I'm not even sure which meeting that was now. Jeff made the motion, and it was to be sent back for specific, like, that the only, there, here we go. Right there. Thank you, Brent. That we keep the requirement to renew at the end of the year, but, like, drop everything else. So does that not put it back on the planning commission? And I know that at that point, we wanted a workshop, but is it still, because of that vote, on the planning commission?
I think there is a potential for that, you know, it could just be back at the planning commission because the recommendation was to bring it back. There wasn't a vote on the actual ordinance, there was a vote on the, whether to have a workshop. So, you know, maybe.
Before that one.
Yep.
Before that
So it was, so it was asked to be brought back to the planning commission to discuss Commissioner or Councilmember Chezok's recommendations on there. So maybe I'll defer to council members on what they think that interpretation is. You know, if we think we can just continue to work on it with planning commission. One thing to think about, it probably would have to go back to the planning commission no matter what. We've conducted the public hearing, but then probably wouldn't apply if we bring it back to council. It has to be conducted within 30 days of an ordinance, and the public hearing has to be done at the planning commission level. So we may have to conduct another public hearing. I could get clarification from the attorney on that, though.
Very good. James, do you have a question?
Just in the sake of trying to accomplish things efficiently, I want to say it's page 52 of the packet. For the sake of clarification, it's striked as number 4, or striked as number 1, and it's 0.4, yeah. Is that stricken from the proposed ordinance at this time?
So which part? If you want to scroll up, Brent?
Yeah.
Is it the first part?
So 4, so 3, 4. So it is part D, subject 4.
I think it's just the number.
It's just a number, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm figuring out how I'm going to try to propose a motion. I'll take a swing at something, and I'm going to get a shot for it. I would move to propose the current ordinance with the changes of number 4 being stricken under D of the proposed ordinance. And Town Center and Main Street also being exempt from the proposed ordinance. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but can we do that right now? I don't think we can. I think the ordinance just isn't with us right now to, I don't think we have the power to send the ordinance to city council right now. I think it's at city council. It has to come from city council either to be voted yes or no, or it has to be recommended back to us. I like your ideas, but I think that's where we're at. I think we have to wait for it to come back to us is what we have to do at this point. I could be wrong, but that's the way I'm looking at it right now. And I would encourage Ms. Terry or Tiffany to bring this up to the city council. I would appreciate that. I think this thing deserves more consideration. Anything else to add? Any other questions? If not, I'm going to thank everybody for their contributions to this discussion. I think this is getting a little difficult, but we're moving. I feel like we're moving ahead tonight, and this is good. This is what I was hoping for tonight. So thank you very much for everybody's contribution. And with that, we are on to 7B. We're going to discuss the cannabis ordinance. James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a continuation of the discussion from last meeting. So staff has provided example ordinances from California, which has already legalized recreational marijuana. Also, staff have provided maps along commercial corridor district that display parcel distances from schools in 100-foot, 300-foot, and 500-foot increments. Staff does recommend that cannabis dispensaries should not be allowed in the TN2 district, as they are transitional zoning districts between commercial and residential. There's spots that could potentially work, but really when you look at the TN2 district, there's probably not enough traffic to warrant somebody to invest $500,000 to $1 million in a cannabis dispensary. So just kind of simplifying it and leaving out of the TN2 district would probably be in the best interest of the ordinance. So with that, I figured kind of go line item by line item with the ordinance and kind of discuss that. So it starts out as any cannabis retail store selling adult use cannabis products, not included lower potency hemp products, must comply with the following minimum standards. Approved dispensaries cannot be within 100 feet of a school, residential treatment facility, or an attraction within a public park that is regularly used by minors, including a playground or athletic field. Approved dispensaries within 300 feet of a school, and essentially the same things, would require a conditional use permit. So within 300 conditional use permit, under the 100 it would just not be allowed. Cannabinoid products sales are only permitted between the hours of 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. This is something that city in Minnesota, Woodbury, has had as part of their ordinance. All state statutes and regulations governing such use are strictly adhered to, and all required operating licenses are secured. And then the last part of it is payment of an annual registration renewal fee will be required as part of the ordinances. And then at the last part, cannabis manufacturing and growing, staff is recommending that this type of use should be a conditional use permit in the general industrial district and simply regulated by the rules and administrations of CUPs, and just an opportunity for people near those to make sure that there's not any adverse impacts from potential odors or uses. So with that, there's one other thing I did want to bring up that staff is contemplating. So if somebody were to look at potentially opening a new dispensary, you do look at, you're able to look at the locations, how far are they from a school, how far are they from a treatment facility. They meet the ordinance. Well, now if, say, something moves in there at a later time, they would end up then becoming non-conforming in that instance. So a possible slight alteration to what staff here has is potentially newly approved dispensaries cannot be within 100 feet. That means that at the potential of a new opening, you'd look at that, but if something were to come in at a later time, that's maybe even a private entity for a residential treatment facility, it wouldn't impact and make that business a non-conforming property. So that's something that staff does want the Planning Commission to consider. I also do want to just kind of reiterate, a sober home would not be considered a residential treatment facility. Sober homes are really just residential living. So they would not, would not apply to the 100, 300 feet rule. With that, I can answer any questions.
Very good. Questions for James?
About to start garnishing my paychecks. I heard a commercial.
Yes,
Mr.
James.
Chair. James, so as far as for the listed cannabis dispensary zoning districts that were in your report there, are those also, is there any that are allowed under conditional use or otherwise, as far as for alcohol? Is there any of the ones that you listed that alcohol would be allowed in that are not included in the list?
So alcohol is allowed in that whole list, as well as the off-sale alcohol is allowed in TN2 district. There's no conditional use permit required for that or anything like that within those zoning districts.
Okay.
So this would be maybe a little bit more stringent. I did show some of the example ordinances from California there. Some of them had 250, 500-foot distances. So this is kind of in between just permitting it and then in between what I guess, a city might have for a 500-foot distance.
Do you recall from when working through as far as off-sale being permitted within that TN2, what some of the reasoning was?
I think because there's, wanting to make complete neighborhoods, there's gas stations that might sell it and such. I think that's why it was put into the TN2 district. I know this might be a little bit more, for whatever reason, a little bit more of a touchy subject and a little bit more politically charged with cannabis dispensaries. So, with the TN2 district, it would make things, I think, easier with the ordinance because it does take a considerable amount of more money to open one of these versus a liquor store. So somebody to invest $1 million on a property on Oak Street just isn't likely.
And then lastly, CN2 doesn't have off sale or, okay.
Nope.
Other questions for James? I have a question. What are we hearing from, from two sources. First of all, the OCM, the Office of Cannabis Management. Anything in terms of their model ordinance, anything or no hope?
It sounds, from what I've heard, they're very, very understaffed right now.
Okay.
So I don't think it's coming anytime
help.
soon. I do believe, what we're presenting here is going to fall in line with what state statutes and, ordinances say we can do, so.
As I've discussed before, a large part of Brainerd is basically Braxter, and we can't pretend we're just one little city on our own. The Rise dispensary, the medical dispensary, is now open in Baxter, and it is maybe 120 feet from Brainerd. So, I think we should always be thinking of what is Baxter doing. Have any discussions with your counterparts in Baxter? Any word? Because it sure seemed like they just heard of the medical dispensary and went, sure, no problem, whatever. That's what it seemed like. Which is great from a business. If you want to take a perspective of saying let's welcome business, that's a great welcoming business. So
I did have a conversation probably 3 months ago to see where they're at, and they were kind of waiting on the state of Minnesota for some more guidance.
Okay, so they're waiting and we're moving ahead.
From what I've heard, we're one of the few that are actually discussing it right now since.
So we've kind of talked about different ways to look at it. I think instead of listing, one of the things I think I've kind of talked about, instead of listing, here's all the places you can't possibly do this. Think of more of an overlay perspective, overlay district, where you're saying, here is a good area that would work. Here are some areas that we approve of. When I'm looking at the red circles here you have on the various schools and institutions, could that be incorporated kind of as a no-fly zone? So in other words, you're saying you can do this in the general commercial corridor with the exceptions of the no-fly zones or circles or whatever. Is that an approach that we can take?
I would say potentially, I probably wouldn't do it as an overlay district. There was one municipality that had provided a link. We could try to do some type of mapping where it just provides a map to show where you can put them. And then it kind of has those no-go areas. So they're able to easily see, okay, here's Brainerd, here's Washington Street, and then it's essentially blocked out in those areas. So I think, potentially being able to provide that map would be beneficial. If we get a GIS intern this summer, that's something that, we may be able to have them work on. So kind of my thoughts on that part of it.
Very good.
I would love that map.
Good. And so it sounds like there's a potential that we still, I think the thought is we want to move faster than slower on this as much as we possibly can. And so we're ahead of this, now waiting around for OCM, obviously, and things like this. I don't know. Other thoughts about specific things? What about downtown? Any thoughts about downtown? How does that fit into that? It would seem like that would be an area that we would be permitting, correct?
I do have it included as Town Center and Main Street District as of right now.
And it really wouldn't be affected by any of the no-fly circles necessarily?
You have Washington Street, or Washington, the former school there that does get close to the Town Center district.
Okay.
Not as much, I would say, in those areas.
YMCA, and it is limited as to the amount of impact that I was seeing as far as when we implement the 1-3-5 situation.
As a person who spends many days downtown, works downtown, and is very invested in the business downtown, I would think if we had somebody coming in proposing a dispensary and they're prepared to invest $500,000 to $1 million in the building downtown, I would say, come on downtown. That would be terrific. That's just my perspective on it. What do we all think in terms of what would we like to see from staff next? Any ideas what we'd like to see from staff next on this? more specifics, more of a general, the 10,000 foot kind of approach? What do y'all think?
Well, I think it would be helpful. I don't know if this is out there because it's all very new. I think it would be helpful to see if there's any data, not only on what other cities have done, but how it turned out. If anyone's kind of tracking that. What were the goals of their policies? Were those goals achieved? I think that would be very helpful. Because maybe they did something and maybe it was a good idea, or maybe it was a bad idea, and we'll find out in 10 years.
I think it'd be interesting to look towards Michigan too. Michigan is probably 3 to 5 years ahead of us on this whole process. It'd be interesting to see what they're thinking, what their lessons learned are. So I'm just kind of looking for consensus. So looking at learned experience, I think that would be one thing. I think that's a consensus. We'd like to see what other cities maybe regret doing or what has worked. And so if we could get a little more of that would be helpful. Other thoughts towards that we can direct James, help with James.
I have a question. James, has anybody reached out and they're looking to open a dispensary in Brainerd at this point, or are we still ahead of it right now?
Still ahead of it. Nobody has reached out at
That's
this
where
point.
I want to be.
Yep.
Good. Would we like to see James come back in a month with ideas? Is that good?
Ideas for ordinance?
Yeah, ideas for ordinance. At some point, we're going to have to get this thing we're going to have to hammer it out and say, draft the ordinance. We're going to have an ordinance drafted. And some of this is going to be boilerplate that we know, and some of this is going to be our vision of how we want to see this included or not included in the city. And so we're going to work to do. So what kind of timing would you imagine, James, before we get to the point where we have an ordinance and a hearing and move everything through there?
I think we could probably do maybe one more meeting where we're discussing maybe more of that high level stuff.
Okay.
I can see if I can reach out to a few municipalities. So I have presented potential ordinance there with language. I can see if I can find some municipalities that are similar. Maybe they have the 250-foot buffers. If there's any things they wish they would have done or wouldn't have done with their ordinance, I can see if I can find something maybe similar to what I've proposed in this part to see if that spurs a little bit more conversation or changes to a potential ordinance.
I have one for James. I mean, really what we're looking at, this is gonna go on Washington, South 6th Street, 25. We're looking at the business corridors. Nobody's gonna put it in a neighborhood. As a business, they won't because somebody can't see it.
Right.
So really, that's what you're looking at along these major streets where stuff already is what I think you need to concentrate on, personally. And delve that, and maybe it is closer than 100 foot to Riverside, for example, because there are things there, and there's probably not too many kindergartners running over and buying at lunchtime.
Right.
And I'm not saying that's the place they're gonna go, but
Washington Street is kind of a fence in its own way.
it kinda is.
Yeah, but, yeah. James?
For Director, is the pursuit as two separate ordinances, one for dispensary, one for growth and manufacturing?
They would be included in the same ordinance, but they'd be in different sections. So we'd have to, in the allowed use section table, we'd have two separate parts that are added to the table. And then I'm not really proposing, we have also the allowed use section of the zoning code, which potentially has other conditions for uses. I'm proposing that the cannabis dispensaries would have those other uses that are required, along with, if it does become a CUP, you'd have the rules and administration of that part. The cannabis manufacturing and growing would just be listed as a C in our table, and there would be no other requirements within the allowed use section.
Okay.
All right, very good. Before we wrap up, any other questions, concerns before we wrap up? Yes.
Mr. Chair, I would just say, what's written here, I think is good. I think the 100-foot rule is good because that essentially means that it can't be right across the street. I think anything beyond that might be kind of overkill. And so, everything I see here, I like.
I like the idea of the 300 foot as a CUP and the 100 foot as just no. So I think we're on to some good things there. All right, and I thank everybody for their ideas and discussions. That was terrific. And then we are moving on to Where are we? We're already ready for the public forum. All right, I'm going to open a public forum at 7:09. Chance for citizens to opine on anything that may not be on, that's not on tonight's agenda. Anybody online, Brent? Nobody online. We used to have people online. Huh. All right, we'll close it at 7:09. And then we are going to go to staff reports. And so, James.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So just want to update the commission that at the next meeting, and one of the other big projects that staff's working on, as well as the planning commission has already seen, is the 805 Laurel Street project, which is the mixed-use building that would be the old Thrifty White building. So they will be coming forward for the conditional use permit, as well as some landscape variances. So that'll be heard at the next meeting, with their anticipation to get their applications in by the end of April. That, along with the other part, that the municipality is the actual one that has to sign that application. So that will be in conjunction to what Planning Commission is doing at a city council meeting in the future. And that is all I have.
That's very exciting. All right, and then we have a special guest tonight. We have Mr. Nick Broyles. He is our new city administrator. And first of all, welcome to the city. And a little chance to introduce yourself, if you would like to be so kind.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and had the privilege of meeting three of you prior to the meeting tonight. Had opportunities to meet, obviously, Commissioner Stenglein in her different capacity, wearing a different hat, but had an opportunity to meet Commissioner Norwood at an event, a training event with the fire department last week. Enjoyed that. So it is a pleasure to be here. I'm in my fourth week. It's been a very high tempo for 4 weeks now. I've met a lot of people, shook a lot of hands, just trying to gather context for, what's important to the folks in this community. I'm trying to draw close to our elected officials, draw close to staff, and draw close to the public. Looking forward to getting to know all of you better. Please don't hesitate to call me if you have questions. Stop by, we can visit. But I'm looking forward to developing relationships with all of you, and it's a pleasure to serve this community.
Mr. Broyles, one question. Anything surprising about Brainerd? What's your first impression?
I grew up in Fergus Falls, Minnesota.
Oh, okay.
So it's good to be back in the area. I've been gone for about 35 years doing a variety of things, primarily the military. But it's good to be back in the area. It's good to be back around green and water. So I grew up as probably a typical Minnesota kid. I did a lot of lakes and rivers in the summer and a lot of hockey in the winter. So, I think that as I've visited with folks and I've kind of gotten had some conversations, clearly housing is a significant issue for the community. And I think that's needs something that, the staff and I are going to be working to try to address those issues, as I'm sure this body is as well. So that's on my mind, but that's, and everywhere I've been for the last several years, it's been a significant issue, is affordable housing. So I think that's going to be a primary focus for me and my staff.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the invitation to be here.
It's good to have you on board. All right, we are moving on to members' comments or questions. And we're going to start with Tiffany. Do you have anything?
No great wisdom. Sorry.
No, after that surprise last time, no, I
No,
didn't.
no more garages or anything? We're okay there, all right. Excellent. James?
Nothing to report.
All right. Colin? Nothing? I'm going to channel our former member, Mr. Marone, and I'm going to say, is there any update on the crypto facility? You would ask that every single meeting. I love that. So somebody's got to continue. Any updates?
There's a little bit of movement with it. There may be a transfer of an LLC. They are still interested, from what I've heard, of doing a crypto mining facility. I think Bitcoin right now is pretty high, so there's probably still reason to, people wanting to mine Bitcoin. I think there still has been some discussions. Every now and then they touch in with Brainerd Public Utilities as well, but I would say nothing imminent.
So no money has actually been spent on developing a crypto facility in Brainerd, is that correct?
It has not.
Okay, that's kind of what I was getting at. That's kind of what I was thinking. Yes, James?
And so, just for my own curiosity, the other crypto situation is in Oak Lawn? Or is it in Brainerd?
That one's in Brainerd, so the Just for Crypto is going. It's the VCV that's not right now.
So Just for Crypto is mining?
Yep, they're mining in, it's a former warehouse that's down that Wright Street extension.
Kitty Hawk.
Yep, Kitty Hawk.
All right, very good. All right, with nothing else, I'm going to look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have a second. Any discussion? Of course, no. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you, folks.